why use DISC over any of the other assessments? There are lots of assessments, and all of them are valid in their own way, and it's really how do you want to use the assessments. I personally chose DISC because of all of the benefits I just mentioned, because it gave me that instant rapport, because it helped me communicate better. It was a tool that worked for me. And so, like in the areas of DISC, it's not judging one assessment over the other. This happens to be my assessment of choice. And so, why use DISC? And we talk about it there are three types of motivation. The first type of motivation is fear motivation. And this is sort of that old school, dominant, I'm going to tell you what to do, be fearful of authority, this is what you do, this is what you do, this is what you do. It was really interesting. I grew up in a family where my father was military and very domineering, and this is what you do. And I was having a conversation with my mother about fear as a motivator. And so there was a belief growing up that it was important to have a fear of authority. And growing up, I believed that because I thought, yes, well, that's a standard. Now, let's go back to language and being lazy with language. Standard does not equal fear. They're completely different. And yet in my mind, the fear of authority was this was the standard for living in our house. And so that's followed me until DISC. Because when we look at fear as a motivation, it's temporary. And when we look at fear as a motivator, people in the workplace now will either leave or they won't show up 100%. And when you look at the Gallup poll right now, 87% of our working population is either disengaged or actively disengaged in work. And that's a huge number. When I'm speaking to college students and I say, how many of you think it's hard to find a job? And the whole room raises their hand. I'm like, are you joking? 87% of the population doesn't like the job they have. You're a shoo-in. Go for it. It's so important that we know fear as a motivation isn't long-term, and it's not working with today's millennials. And so we've got to change our path. So what's another motivation? Incentive motivation. For a long time, the carrot was the way to motivate people. And again, people often say, oh, if I got paid more. Well, we know that up to a certain dollar amount, it doesn't matter what you make. And given my behavioral style, I don't remember that number. But point being, it's somewhere around $40,000. Okay? Once you make more than $40,000, no matter who you are or where you live, you can maintain somewhat of a household, and it's no longer a long-term motivating factor. And so when you know the carrot isn't going to work long-term either, what are you left with? One way to motivate people, and that's causal motivation. And this is the motivator that is so strong because you've connected a cause, you've connected a purpose with the people that you're working with. Which is why we'll talk a lot about purpose. We started today talking about purpose. It's so important that there is a purpose for being here. There's a purpose for going to work every day. There's a purpose for where you live right now. There's a purpose for the organization in which you work. There's a purpose for the relationship that you're in. It's so important that we understand the cause, because that's the key to long-term motivation. Connecting people with their cause, not ours. People do things for their reasons, not ours. And so it's really important that we use DISC to figure out what's their cause and be able to motivate them that way. Click the link below to see if you're ready to take the next step.